Well, good morning, guys. Good to see y'all this morning. When I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about and what I thought God was leading me to talk about, I thought, well, let's start off with a funny story about how life can be messy. So I was thinking back through my life. I have a lot of messy life stories. But the funniest one was my wife and I went and stayed with her aunt while our house was being tinted for termites. And we had a beagle at the time, and she had an Australian Shepherd, and they just loved each other. So we get down there, and she lives in Del Mar. So we drove there, took our kids. Now, we have 4 adopted kids from Ethiopia. So we took our 4 kids, our beagle, our cat, invaded her home for the weekend. And so we're hanging out there, and in the middle of the night, my wife wakes me up to the most horrific smell I've ever smelled in the world. And she says, "I think it's chemical warfare." And I was like, "No, honey, it's a skunk." Our dogs had gone out into the backyard through the doggy door and chased a skunk up to the 3rd story of the house and messed around with it until they finally carried it back out the doggy door. Oh my gosh, I have never smelled such a horrific smell in my life. So we've got our house being tinted, this almost uninhabitable, beautiful house in Del Mar that smells horrifically bad. And so then we're going online trying to figure out how do you get rid of skunk smell. And you know, they've got some really good things online, but they almost all have peroxide, hydrogen peroxide. Well, my kids being from Ethiopia, you cannot put that on their hair. And so we were like, how do you find something that doesn't have that we can get that smell out of their hair? So we're doing that. So then we end up getting back home, and there's this really big fire near our house, and so we get home, and there's this 1/2 inch of ash from a plastics plant that burned. And they're like, you cannot go just clean that up. You have to protect yourself and wear all this stuff. So we're like, termites, skunk, horrific ash, and then fires. There's a fire that's real close to my wife's aunt's house. So we go, and she's like, can you come help pull some things out of my house? I'm afraid it's going to burn down. So we go back there. It still smells like skunk, but now it smells like burnt skunk. What a week. It was crazy. And looking back at it, it's hilarious. And in the middle of it, it was not hilarious, because we got back home, and Monday morning, I couldn't send my kids to school because they still smelled like skunk. But sometimes life is messy. Sometimes it's just messy. And when you look at that, looking back at it, I'm like, wow, that was a string of annoyances. But in the middle of it, it felt ugly. And I wish I could say that was like the most stressful time, the most stressful part of my life. Not at all. That was just a funny story. But when you think about stress and you think about things, I'm a pastor and a counselor now. My first major was marine biology. My son calls me this science nerd, and I guess that's right. So when I was in that, about a year after I dropped out of that program, they created this wonderful thing called the biodome. I don't know if y'all have heard about the biodome before. Really great experiment. They're like, okay, we're going to totally encapsulate something and create this pseudo atmosphere and see what really makes life tick. Really cool thing. Big grand experience. And the most incredible thing happened. They started doing it, and the trees all fell over. And you're like, these big, huge trees, they would only grow so tall, and then they would fall over and die. And what they figured out is they forgot to put wind in the biodome. They didn't think wind was a big deal. But apparently, trees grow what they call stress wood when they bend over in the wind. And without stress wood in the tree, it flops over and dies. So if you don't have wind, you don't get a tree. Because you have to have the stress to make a tree what it's supposed to be. Pretty incredible. You would have never thought God put the wind there to make the trees stand upright. But He sure did. It kind of really looked at this. God has this super intricate plan, but stress may not always be a bad thing. Now, I don't always advertise that I'm going to come here and talk about suffering. Because then you say, I'm going to talk about suffering. I'll get 5 people here, and they're all people in the middle of this horrific thing, and everybody else is like, no, I'm not going to go listen to that. But suffering is a part of our daily life. Job 14:2 says our lives are few days and full of trouble, right? James 1:2 says, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. We as Christians don't get a pass on trouble. We just don't. But I think not only do we not get a pass, I think without it, we don't become who God wants us to be. Amen. So when I look at suffering, I go back to my 6th grade year. I lived in a small town called Littlefield in the panhandle of Texas. And I have 2 best friends. And I remember in the 6th grade, I'm sitting at church. We're in a circle. We're learning about God. And all of a sudden, someone comes in and says, Scott has been shot and he's dead. And that was my best friend. And I'm sitting there. I remember seeing the room and hearing nothing for the rest of that hour. And coming out just in shock. Like, wait, what happened? And it turns out he was with another kid that I sort of knew. And it was a police officer's son, and they had gotten a hold of his backup duty weapon and were playing around with it. And he accidentally shot him. So my best friend was dead. And I was a 6th grader. And nobody knew what to do with me. Nobody, like that. I remember coming out of that room and my mom giving me a great big hug. I remember going to the funeral and nothing else was said about what that meant, what we needed to do with that, how I needed to wrap my brain around that. I was entered into this kind of quiet struggle at night when I was alone, trying to figure out what to do with the fact that my best friend was dead. How do I deal with God with that? How do I figure out what that means? So it was this quiet struggle. And then I remember thinking, okay, Lord, what do I do with this? And I had some really incredible time with God, crying in my bed at night. And so, worked on healing, worked on through that, and then there was a very interesting thing that happened. I began to see God as bigger than my little story. I began to see God as bigger than just wanting good stuff for me. And I said, God, I just want to give this to you and do whatever you want with it. So we're going to come back to that story in a minute. But I want to read to you 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. Now, this really is out of the Bible, but my glasses aren't really good, so I had to blow it up big so I can read it. It says, Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In His great mercy, He has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who, through faith, are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this, you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. What a powerful little passage about how glorious God is. And in the middle, he tucks in this little verse, though now for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Now, when you're in that, it does not feel like this little tucked away part of this glorious passage. It feels overwhelming. It feels huge. It feels like it's all of your life. And you have to stop and remember that it's this little part tucked away in this glorious story of Jesus. So when you do that, when you reframe that, when you look at it, you realize that this suffering is what makes your faith genuine and proven. So when you think about your tough times of life, you're like, I need to set this up where this is going to be a part of my faith story. So, not the common sermon, suffering is good for you, but suffering is good for you. Because it's going to take your faith and it's going to refine it. It's going to make it genuine, and it's going to make it something where you can stand and feel horrible and know beyond the shadow of a doubt that God is with you. And that's where we need to go with it. So then my challenge to you is, what do you believe about suffering? And what's that look like in your life? So 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 says, this is where Paul is struggling with what he describes as a thorn in his flesh. He says, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So when you look at that, it's like, wow, to be strong, I need to be brought to a place where I realize I can't do it on my own. And when I can't do it on my own, then I realize how powerful and glorious God is. Because I can't do it on my own. So then back to my story. The guy that shot Scott on accident, his name was John. And so I'm at school, out in front of the school building, the first day he comes back to school. Now, oh my gosh, I had grief, but nothing compared to what John had. Walking up to the school, There was a kid that he was autistic before we had autism labeled, but that's what he was. And he walked up to John and said, "You killed Scott, right?" Oh my gosh. I was standing right there. John took off back. Luckily, his mom saw him coming. She stopped the car, took him off. I'm like, oh my gosh. That was my first encounter and first thinking of, oh my gosh, what's going on with John? So, I prayed for John, and God was like, bring him to your youth group. He needs me. I was like, what? Well, I did. I invited him, and he came. And he joined our youth group, became a part of our youth group. About 6 months later, we went on a ski trip, and he accepted Christ on that ski trip. And he was bawling because he got to see that God forgave him and was with him and loved him. And he didn't think that was possible after that accident with Scott. But I had this front row seat to see how much bigger God was than me, how much bigger God was than John, and how he loved all of us. It was incredible. It was a beautiful story. But it all kind of hinged on this, hey, invite him to youth group. Now, that must have been really awkward for him because he knew I was really good friends with Scott. I now think, man, what was that like for him to see me walking up to him after his problem with the kid coming up and just saying, hey, you killed Scott? That must have been horrible for him. But I think it shocked him when I said, hey, come to our youth group. Something as simple as that can make a huge impact and effect. That when you see someone hurting, reaching out is the answer. You don't have to show up with the answers, you just have to show up. Makes it so much easier. We all think, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, go stand there. It makes a difference, it will work. So in processing through this and in thinking about suffering and in thinking about, how God shapes us. I grew up in the panhandle of Texas. When I switched from marine biology to God calling me into a counseling ministry, I was like, well, I was at a very specialized school for marine biology. So I quit. And I went to this little podunk community college, Clarendon College, and I went there because I was youth director at this small church. So I went there. So my PE was roping, because that was kind of a fun thing. And I was like, I like horses. Wow, I don't want to go lift weights. I want to go roping. So we were there, and about halfway through, they brought in this horse, and they were like, hey, we're going to teach you how to break a horse. I was like, cool. Now, I was a little more fit then than I am now. So I was like, I want to be a part of that. Let's do that. So we broke a horse. And when you think about it, it's a really incredible process. And you go slow. You start off just getting the horse used to being around you. And then you tire them out a lot, and you put a saddle on them. And you just get them used to having the saddle on. And it took the whole last half of our semester to be able to do this. It was a really neat process. But in thinking about it, I realized that breaking a horse is all about submission. You are getting that horse to submit to your authority, even though you're not as big as that horse. And that process of submission is an incredible process. Because you take this wild horse that isn't good for anything but running free in the wild. And through that process of breaking, you get a horse that's willing to submit, and then is an incredible, useful partner in all kinds of ranch work. And I'm like, oh, you know, God does that with us. God does that with us. He goes through this process of breaking so that we will submit to Him. And when you think about it, it's a lot like that process of breaking a horse. God calls us to this place of submission. And one of the tools that He uses to do that is hardship, is suffering. That He takes this suffering that we have and He uses it to turn us into someone who really can truly submit to Him. Because when we don't submit to Him, we're of no use to Him. But when we submit to Him, He will use our giftings and guide us, and He lets us be a part of His story. What a blessing that we have a God who chooses to let us be a part of what He's doing down here. Not spectators, but participants. But the key to get a job in that is submission. We have to submit to God. And when I think of submission, I think of King David. So we're going to look in 1 Samuel chapter 24. It says, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all of Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. So we're picking up the story, and David has already been anointed king. But he hasn't taken the job yet. And so it's amazing how much time there is between his anointing and his being king. And Saul kind of gets wind of this and is like, oh my gosh, I am king. You're not going to be king. If I kill you, I'll get to still be king. Some kind of messed up thinking, but that's kind of where he was. He's like, being king was more important than anything to him. So he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there. Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of, when He said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So he's going into this cave. David's men are telling David, God has just given you Saul. Do with him as you wish. David doesn't kill him. The man who has been chasing him around, trying to kill him, David's there, so close he cuts off the corner of his robe, but he doesn't kill him. Then it says, afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. Talk about submission, right? I'm going to be king, but God has told me Saul is his anointed king right now. I have to wait. Then Saul's chasing and trying to kill me, but I have to wait. That is true submission. God told him, do not go take over by force. And he submitted, and he even felt bad about having cut off the corner of his robe. So you get this idea, this place. King David, I do not believe, would have been who he was in God's sight had he not been chased by King Saul relentlessly. Because he learned something hiding in those caves. That's where his faith became genuine and proven, and something that would carry him through being king. God knew what he needed. He knew, just like that tree needs some stress wood, he knew that David needed to be proven before he could be king. So being chased through the wilderness and hiding in caves was a part of God's preparing David to be a man after his own heart. So when you think about that, and you think about our lives, and you think about how much we like to whine about struggles that we go through, it makes me think about all of those Psalms that David wrote where he starts off whining and then reminds himself of who God is. So you got the whiny part, oh, God's this, and oh, yeah, I don't need to whine anymore. I know who God is. And I think that's in there for us because we start off with that whiny, and we need to remember that we've got to finish our psalm. We've got to look back at who God is and say, oh, yeah, I'm just me, but God is God. And then you get to the end of your psalm where you praise and glorify God for whatever He's given you in the moment, because you know who He is and you know what He's going to do. And it may not look like what you want. It may not feel like what you want. It might not be what you signed up for. But it's God's will for you. So, my wife and I adopted 4 kids from Ethiopia. We went and got them all at the same time. They didn't speak English. Few words. We got really good at gestures and grunts and getting that message across. It was a good thing. And that was a struggle, but that was nothing compared to the week that we realized 3 of our 4 kids had schizophrenia. And 2 of them tried to kill themselves in the same week. And it was one of those, we knew God had called us to this adoption. We knew that He had picked us off because we told God, yeah, adoption is great. We want 2 under the age of 3. Let's go. And He gave us 2 under the age of 3 and 2 others. It was a process. It was an argument. And we had gotten to that. But that week that it felt like our life was falling apart, we had to look back and say, no, God, we remember God, brought us here. And there was no question about that because He had brought us from 2 to 4 and said, go. And then we came to this place of this week of what felt like disaster. And at the time, we weren't thinking, well, I'm a therapist, my wife's a therapist, she did this group with schizophrenic adults when we first started. We weren't thinking all that. We were thinking, Lord, what did you do to us? What did you do to us? And the answer is, it's another step in that proven genuineness of our faith. Just another step. I have lots of steps of that. That was another step. And I remember driving back from one of the hospital stays. You know, our mental health system is broken in California. It just is. So I was living in Riverside, driving to Northridge to see my son in the psych hospital. And I remember driving back in the rain, and this song came on the radio. And it was Bring the Rain. It's an incredible song. It was one that I had heard in high school and loved. But what it's saying is that Jesus, whatever it takes for you to be praised, if it takes the rain, bring the rain. Now, I did not understand when I was in high school all of what that meant. Now, I thought I did. I had been through the whole Scott thing, and I thought I had my sights on that pretty good, but oh my gosh, no. That was like elementary school for me. I've been through much more. But I approached it differently because I knew that God was going to be with me through it all. And I knew that He was going to bring me out of it with something that I needed for the next one, or something that I needed for ministry, or something I needed for a conversation with someone else. So when we think about suffering, it's really important that we don't spend all of our time and energy building a biodome for us to live in. We can't spend all of our time and energy trying to protect ourselves and everyone else, and this is the hard part, and everyone we love from hardship. Because when we do that, we're robbing them of God shaping them into who He wants them to be. And we're stealing from them that proven genuineness of their faith that comes from suffering. C.S. Lewis has a really neat quote. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It's His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Amen. Beautiful, beautiful, big quote about God speaking to us when times are tough. Then I want to leave you with a verse. John 16:33 says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. That needs to be the key to our theology of suffering. Take heart, I have overcome the world. So reframing your look at suffering, looking at it differently, looking at how God draws you to Him and how He brings you to a place of submission so that you can be a part of His work because He has overcome the world. Let's pray. Lord, I just want to thank You for Your love for us and that You're with us through the good and through the bad, how You can take an evil world and use it to shape us to be more like You. Help us to see You in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.